Thanks for joining us today. I'm Michelle McLean with Salt Security, and I'm really excited to be joined by Nate Steinberg, Principal Information Security Specialist at Amway. Nate, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Absolutely, Michelle. My pleasure.
It's been fun to prep this and learn a little bit about what you guys are doing and how you've approached this project. Obviously, API security is kind of a new topic for so many people, and the kinds of lessons you can bring to the table are super valuable. So we're grateful for your time. So Nate, let's just start off with a quick introduction of you and your role there at Amway, and then Amway as a business.
Okay, yeah, sure. Sounds good. So yeah, my name is Nate Steinberg. I've been in the technology space for a little while, 20 plus years, with a few different companies, all kind of in the corporate world. I've been at Amway for going on 20 years this year. So I celebrate a milestone with this company. It's been wonderful 20 years. My background is mostly in middleware and enterprise integration. And so I know a lot. I've deep dove in those two spaces, but InfoSec, not so much. I've only been in InfoSec a couple years now. My focus has been, learning, educating myself on the InfoSec portfolio, and then security engineering, and then API security. I did API gateways in a former life, and now I've changed lenses and I look at it from a little different space, from the security space. So it's been very exciting. And then who do I work for? I work for Amway. I'm guessing that a number of folks on the call have heard of Amway. We're a health and wellness, beauty, home care company. Our motto is helping people live better lives. We are a direct selling company, and I'm happy to say that we're the world's largest direct selling company. We have a huge group of supporting distributors globally. We operate in 100 plus different countries and territories in the world. We have 450 different SKUs in our portfolio. And some of our brands for recognition, if you may have heard of them, are Neutralite, which is kind of our vitamins and supplements division, Artistry, skincare, makeup, fragrance, body care, etc. Satinique is our hair care line. And then for home, lots of different things for home. I get asked all the time, hey, does Amway still sell cleaners that do this and this? And in a lot of cases, I'm able to say yes. We sell a lot of different cleaners for different things. We sell water purification units, air purification, cookware, laundry, etc. So lots of different fun things that Amway produces. And when we look at API security and APIs in general, Amway is a like I said, a direct selling. And how do folks research and buy and procure products, etc. And it's really primarily from our e-commerce sites globally. So we're operating in 100 plus different countries. In a lot of cases, we have 100 plus different e-commerce sites globally, and all of those e-commerce sites need to talk to our back-end systems of record so that we can record and ship products, record the financial transactions, etc. And so lots of different e-commerce systems, lots of different APIs in play to get all that information flowing back and forth. And so that's kind of where our API journey is. APIs are proliferating in the market right now, and that's kind of where ours started. We have all these e-commerce sites. We have all these needs to get data transferred back and forth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we've seen, e-commerce is one of the more prevalent sources of APIs. Can you talk a little bit about, on the one hand, APIs have been around forever, right? So we get the obvious question, like, why now? Why is API security such a big deal now? And in part, it's often a reaction to a change in the API landscape, how many we're using or how valuable they are, the functions they're performing. Can you talk a little bit about how the role of APIs has changed for your business? Or whatever sort of was the tipping point. How did you know? If APIs have been around a long time, you've been probably digital for a long time. How did you know you needed additional protections?
No, very, very good question. So, this is a simple slide that I put together just to kind of highlight what our API management platform looks like. But, the concept of cloud concept of SaaS, cloud providers, et cetera, is fairly new in the market, okay? And before we had cloud, what did we have? Everything was in a data center. Everything was on premises somewhere. And for Amway, we operate in all these different countries. We had lots and lots of different local data centers to host our commerce platform. And when folks would order product, they would either use an IVR system to order product. They would use our global sales support center to order product. And then when e-commerce systems started to come out, everything was hosted in site, and then we had a very small channel to the public world, and so there wasn't that big risk there. Okay, way back, when I think about e-commerce of the past. Well, now, e-commerce systems in a lot of cases are hosted services. They're hosted in the cloud somewhere. They're in a SaaS somewhere. And so Amway is no different. We started to take advantage of some of these SaaS models, and so our e-commerce platform moved from an on-premises situation to a cloud service. And when that happened, it opened up a great world for us, but it also opened up a lot of exposure, because we were now communicating in the public internet. And the public internet there's a lot of good things that happen out there, and there's a lot of bad actors looking for ways to get in. And so, we have a public internet presence now, an e-commerce public internet presence. We have all these back-end systems. We needed a way to interface between the public internet and the back end. And so we started to expose microservices and all these systems of record, saying, okay, we want to be able to consume them from public resources. How can we do that safely? And so we started investing in API gateways. Okay, the first API gateway that we had was called WSO2. That's for a specific market that we have. Okay, so WSO2 was able to provide that public presence for us. So our e-commerce site was able to consume those public endpoints from WSO2. And then WSO2, by nature of an API management system, was able to provide some level of security around those, and then interface with our systems of record. Okay. Shortly thereafter, we adopted. We saw the need and the benefit of an API gateway platform, and so we started to develop and build out our typical Mastery infrastructure. And Mastery became our enterprise API gateway. And so WSO2 was still running, providing that service. Mastery was coming up. We were building the infrastructure to interface with more and more backend systems, provide more and more functionality. I think back of when we first built out the Mastery infrastructure. We had it on premises. Our average calls were, first it was 100,000, and then it was 1 million calls per month, and then it grew exponentially. And today our calls through Mastery they average around 1.5 billion calls per month in just this gateway alone. And then WSO2 adds on top of that. And then we started to, we're a multi-cloud shop, and we started to move more and more compute things over into AWS. And so to expose those, we use the AWS API gateway, and so we have lots of calls there. And then we're looking at moving. We're also using Google for a few things, and so we're looking to expose a few services via Apigee. So our footprint today, we have 4 different API lifecycle management systems in play. None of these do this. I mean, they all perform a similar function, and they allow the public internet to interface with our backend systems through a secure API gateway platform, which is great. But at the same time, it's not the same securing AWS gateway as it is Apigee, and it's not the same for WSO2, and it's not the same for Mastery. And in our world, we have separate API developers for each of these different columns here. And so, an expert in Apigee might not know much about WSO2, and likewise with Mastery, et cetera. They just don't. It takes a real special skilled API developer to know more than one management platform. And so, Amway, like any other company, is looking to manage cost. We're looking to gather some telemetry about this. We want to understand what kind of calls are going through, capacity planning, et cetera. And so a couple years ago, we started to ask the question, okay, how can we pull out reports from Mastery? How can we know what kind of calls, or what does a normal month look like? You know, how many calls do we have? What are our big hitters as far as API endpoints? You know, the same for WSO2, the same for API Gateway. There's no central plane, no central view to look at that. I have to go in one place to look here. I have to go in another place to look for Mastery. I have to go, you know, I think that Amway's not alone in this, but we have 150 plus different AWS accounts. And so in order for me to look at API Gateway resources in AWS, I would have to look in 150 different places. Unless we have, you know, somebody who's willing to step up and build a single pane view of those. And so we saw then, we said, wow, we have a complex ecosystem here. You know, we're trying our best to secure these resources at the gateway level, but you know, we can't see what we can't see. We need to know what we need to protect. And we need to know what's out there, what our patterns look like, et cetera. And so that's when we started to look for a third party to help us with this initiative, protecting this kind of something that sits either, you know, during out here between the public internet and our gateway, or at least at runtime to see what's happening in our gateway environment. And so that's when we started to do, you know, POCs and evaluations of API security vendors.
That is super helpful background. And you spurred a couple of thoughts that I just thought were quick, you know, or important to share with other people who are sort of beginning this journey. The first is the multiplicity of gateways. We see that a lot. It's not unusual. They do all operate differently. And I also think what you hinted at in terms of what the gateway is able to do versus another layer of protection, they're able to do governance and enforcement on schema potentially, you know, something that's living in their world. Do you look like this? You have to look like this to run. But what they're not great at is sort of like on the fly, watching the traffic, what's happening in my environment. And even if you had a perfectly fine API, if it were being abused, the gateway can't really see that. And I think your notion of that holistic view, do I have a comprehensive view of everything? I think that's an interesting take. I think the other one is we still run into companies where they are finding APIs that didn't get released through any of these governance platforms, right? Not only do they have multiples, but stuff's finding their way in through the back door, right? So just that complete view. And I just want to give a quick shout out to you. You guys have been great partners. We didn't have, right out of the gate, we didn't have all those gateways supported. Amway pushed us, and we built additional integrations to support you. And that makes us better. And it makes us more broadly applicable. So I want to thank you for that, because it really has been a very helpful partnership. We had a question from Mike, but he thinks you answered it. So I'll let him poke back in if he wants to. He asked about prioritization. And I'm guessing what he was getting at when he first saw your diagram is you have multiple gateways. How'd you know where to start? I think it's a really good question that I'll ask maybe in a slightly different way. We get this a lot. There's a pretty broad landscape of APIs. You can't do everything at once. We've seen some customers go by application, like we care about this app, so we're going to start there, and then we'll move into the next area of infrastructure. Did you guys take a stepwise approach in terms of where you wanted to roll out API security first, or how did you guys dive in?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. A really good question. And you know, one of the things that you just mentioned, Michelle, was you know, how do the API gateway platforms themselves help, you know, protect the calls to the back end, and you know, why does that kind of drive the need for an API security solution outside that, something at the runtime? You know, So as far as, Amway's a big company, and as far as a governing body for gateways, we didn't really have one. And so we had a team step up at Amway that said, okay, we're gonna own everything that's API gateway. We're gonna own that. Okay. Well, when Amway finally decided to do that, WSO2 had already left the dock. They were already off and running. They were in production. Mastery was really our second gateway platform, and we were building that on the fly. And when you're building these things on the fly to meet a deadline, we want to get this out of the gate. We want to have this running in production by X date. A lot of times, security takes a back seat when you're doing that. Okay, security takes a back seat, and furthermore, governance of what this should look like, governance and governance with API security also takes a back seat. And so we were more concerned about getting this out of the gate and going live with it than we were about securing things. Okay, so when we talk about priority, how did we prioritize this? Well, we knew that WSO2 was already live. They're already in production. Mastery is trying to catch up. And so let's focus on, our production environment first. Let's get that out of the gate first so that we're offering some level of protection. And we were new to Salt at that time. And so we said, okay, we're going to start here. We're going to see what Salt has to offer, what they can do. And so it was learning, and we can, continue to learn there. And then we started to get some things into Mastery, and we said, okay, what are our heavy hitters in Mastery? What are the biggest APIs, the biggest call volume and the biggest impact? And so we looked at those, and we kind of took a contrary approach. We said, okay, these are the big ones. These have the most impact. Let's start with something small so we can see how this integration looks in Mastery and what Salt can do for us. And then we'll move up the chain on some of these bigger impact endpoints and services. Okay. And so and we kind of did all four of these in parallel. We've been working we've been on this journey now for a year and a half to roll out Salt Security, and we're still not done, just because the way we integrate is a little bit different with each gateway platform. And even when talking about AWS API gateway, there's more than one way to integrate these gateway resources with Salt Security, with the traffic collector. And so we're trying to fit the integration with each of these gateways that meet the customer needs, our internal customers, the best. Okay. Right now, I can think of 3 different ways that we've integrated with AWS. Okay. There's kind of one with Mastery. There's a couple different ones with WSO2, and then there's a couple different approaches with Apogee. And so we're doing AWS, Mastery, and WSO2 all in parallel at the same time. And then, with Apogee, what we've had the opportunity to do, because it's new to us, the security team jumped in front of the API development team and said, hey, we're going to inject ourselves here. What are you doing with Apogee? And we have this cool product out here called Salt Security that offers all this neat security protections and vulnerability checks, etc. How do we integrate with your CI/CD pipeline so we don't have to go back and do it? Let's just have it as part of the rollout schedule. And so I would say in a best case scenario, that's where, an API security solution should be in place before you roll anything out. Because for us, we found that has worked the best here. It's been the seamless. We've had time to, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something different. Okay, now we have all this figured out, all this POC done, and it's just part of the pipeline. So as they develop new APIs, new environments, it's already there.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think again, it's so typical that this challenge that you're talking about, there's natural tension between moving fast, innovating fast, which the business needs to do. It's how you stay competitive, and doing so in a way that keeps you safe. And on the Salt side, what we're trying to do is sort of say, we got you wherever you are. Like if it's already out there and running, let's go make sure nobody's abusing that and being, doing nefarious things over there. If it is early on, let's go do it in parallel. Let's go check some stuff pre-prod, and then, it can come full circle. You can get some insights about minor successes, actual exploits in runtime, feed that back into the dev cycle or not necessarily the dev cycle, but well, yeah, I mean, into your dev teams for hardening APIs. So that makes a lot of sense. So you're getting at this interesting challenge of ownership. It's not a simple thing. Developers write APIs, but they can't really own the whole problem of securing APIs. It's simply not realistic.
Right.
And they're going to look at things with a certain lens. And to be perfectly frank, there's only so far you can get with pre-prod testing anyway with APIs, because it's a business logic attack, and that's really hard to exercise in pre-prod. So how do you guys handle that ownership issue? How have you crafted ways to work together effectively? And maybe it's lumpy and maybe it's different with different groups, but we'd just love to hear a little bit about straddling these different groups.
Yeah, sure. And it is, as mentioned earlier, each of these different gateway platforms have different API development teams working on them. And so it's as a security team, we are constantly trying to catch up and try to be in front of any threats or any projects, et cetera, that are going out the door. And so it's a constant struggle to try to get in front of things before they're released. Okay. In some cases we've been successful. In some cases we have not been successful. So what we've tried to do is the security team has taken ownership of this API security. When I say security team, I'm talking about our title, our information security and risk team. Okay. And so we have taken ownership of our API security platform, Salt Security. We've taken ownership of that. And what we've tried to do then is communicate and advocate and push this communication out to the company to say, look, here are all the different things that the security team offers. Here's our portfolio products. Here's what they do. For securing APIs, here's Salt Security. This is how you implement it. We've put together all the documentation, presentations, et cetera. It's just now we're trying to communicate and push that out so people understand, hey, I'm running into this problem, or I have this gap. Here's this tool that will fill that gap. And then we've included a contact there so that they know they have someone they can reach out to talk to about it. So myself and the security team, we own the security platform, the API security platform. Now, as far as ownership of APIs and the API gateways themselves, we do not own that. We own the API governance and security standard, and we have shared that standard with the company so that they're aware of it. But we're not holding hands or mandating that they implement the standard. We're just giving them those guardrails that they can follow. Here's the standard. Here's how we recommend you design your APIs and you secure them, and make sure that you have things like authorization and authentication around them. Make sure that you have rate limiting, et cetera. Make sure that you have some visibility around them. So we're advocating for those things, but each of the different teams owns their own APIs.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. We just do not have. We don't have the visibility or understanding or knowledge about all the different, all the various development that is happening. There's no way that we could own that.
Totally fair and makes a lot of sense. We've had a couple of good questions come in. You keep delighting Mike, by the way. He asks questions and you answer it before you're done.
Well, super. I'm glad that Mike is asking
Mike's
questions.
Mike's happy. Venkat has another good question here. Can you talk a little bit about some of the baseline security requirements ahead of putting out APIs? So do you mandate MFA? Are you doing code scanning and logging? Are there any other requirements that you consider when your teams are developing and deploying APIs?
Gosh, that's that's a very good question for a colleague of mine. Steve works in the vulnerability space, and he's kind of self-proclaimed himself as the shift left champion. Okay, and I would say that some of these things kind of go with shift left, especially code scanning. I mean, before you roll code out the door, it's best to do some code reviews, some vulnerability scannings before it's released, so that you can shore up any gaps, especially when you use third-party libraries, etc. I mean, Log4j is a pretty good example. Let's make sure that all of these things are secure before we roll them out. So as part of baseline security, requirements as they relate to APIs, MFA doesn't really relate to our APIs so much as code scanning and logging, etc. does. Regarding APIs, we want to make sure that our backend services are secure. Okay, and that goes along with, we want to do that initial code scanning against our backend services to make sure that we've shored up as many gaps as we can. As we move forward with releases, etc., we want to do that penetration testing. So the code scanning is before it's released. The penetration testing is after it's released. We're trying to look for holes in there, etc. And then when we release things, when we expose things via API, that's when a tool like Salt Security comes in to really analyze behavior of these APIs, and to do that next step, saying, you know what, this is what normal behavior looks like. This is what bad behavior looks like. We've noticed this happening on this endpoint. This looks bad. Or hey, we've been analyzing this particular endpoint, and here are some suggestions on what you can do to beef up security, to protect it, to close gaps, etc. So those are, I would say, some of the baseline requirements. And again, it goes back to, there's lots and lots of articles and publications out there about API security best practices. They're all written a little bit different. They all say things just a little bit different. But it comes down to, some things I would say are more common sense. I mean, make sure that you're putting some security around your APIs at the start. Make sure that you're putting some authentication and then authorization, scope-based authentication around them. There are different types of authentication measures, basic auth being the easiest, but kind of the least secure. There are some that are way more secure than that. So, some of those things, just, the kind of following those best practices. I mean, we tell our development teams, when you're designing and developing APIs, here are some things that you should be thinking about. We had an example recently of a team that wanted to expose, some financial data to the public internet. Hey, this is just, kind of a quick win. We have someone that needs to do this. Security team, is this okay? And so we looked at the example for them, and there was no authentication at all around their public endpoints. I said, hey, do you know how big of a risk this is? I mean, all it takes is one bad actor to find this endpoint, and they're in our systems, and then they start doing what they need to do, recon, etc. And so just some of those common sense things are helpful.
That's a pretty glaring hole. I think one of the things that can be tougher is you can put in all these common sense protections like you're talking about, and the API can be working as designed, and yet it can be abused. And I think that notion of like watching things after the fact, does this fit a normal pattern? Is this typical amount of data that comes back from this request? Things like that. I think those are the layers of protection kind of unique to purpose-built API security that is never going to come from a WAF, is never going to come from a gateway. Doesn't matter what your governance policies are. Like, you've just got to watch.
You have to watch.
Watch in case you made a mistake, or watch in case somebody clever figures out a way to abuse things, right? The Experian example comes to mind, where the API worked as designed. It's just nobody thought about zeros for a birthday. And, next thing you know, everybody's credit score is on the line. So sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead, Nate.
No worries. It's one thing to monitor for, bad human behavior. We think about, okay, here's this API that I'm exposing. What's the risk in exposing this? Because what's the chances a human is going to find this endpoint, kind of thing. And the chances are minimal that a human is going to find this, but that's not the biggest threat. The bigger threat on the public internet is automated, our bots and other things that are out there scanning and looking for open holes. Those are the bigger threats, and that's where something like Salt can help to watch our traffic patterns, to analyze the traffic patterns, and then point out, hey, this doesn't look right. Maybe you should take a closer look at this guy. And we've seen things in our environment that Salt has identified that don't look right, and they've turned out to be bots, and they're not coming from one geographical region or one IP. They're coming from hundreds all over the globe. And Salt has been able to point those out to us. And a human watching transaction logs, an API gateway, a WAF, as you mentioned, they're not going to find those for you.
Yeah, it's not gonna jump out. Another couple of good questions from the audience. One asks, do you rely on end users for testing?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we do. So we have a couple different testing scenarios that we go through for our code, right? We typically when we're rolling out a new program, et cetera, we go through unit testing and then system integration testing, et cetera. And then eventually, it's going to be, we engage some of our end users, the folks that are actually going to use the platform, to do that last round of testing before we release something. They're gonna use it like they would use it in a normal day, and maybe the developers hadn't thought about this scenario, and so they're going to point, hey, this doesn't work the way I would expect, kind of thing. So we do have those different testing scenarios for our code releases. Okay. And we also have, performance testing teams. So we're right now we're evaluating in WSO2. We're evaluating a change a major change that we want to introduce in the environment. And our unit testing looks good. Our unit or our smoke testing looks good. But we want to do a more in-depth, exercise more functions of the system. And so we engage a performance testing team to help us with that.
You're a mind reader, because Venkat just asked that question as well. Can you talk about requirements for performance testing as it pertains to rolling out APIs? So he asked, is it mandatory all the time? It sounds like maybe it's a mix for you.
It is a mix for us. Amway has gone through a few transformations in the last number of years, and we used to have a team dedicated to performance testing. And so anytime any project needed a performance test, we would engage this team, and they would set up the test scripts, et cetera, to help us with that. But that has kind of gone by the wayside, I would say. And so for a lot of in performance testing, if anyone has done it, it's very intense. I mean, you have to have, what does a payload look like, and what different system functions am I going to test? And it's a performance test is very specific to that particular function. And so, given all the different projects and all the different teams and all the different functions we have, it's just impossible to have a central performance testing team. And
yeah, so that makes sense.
We have pockets of them
that tied into the various systems that they already understand well. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. As you've worked through this rollout and, multiple ways to integrate with these platforms, things like this, can you talk a little bit about how you've moved through your various environments? How have you identified where you want to go next with API security, and, maybe some quick early wins, if those shaped some of your decisions about where to go next? How did you, you're a big company with hundreds of systems. So yeah, just talk a little bit about how you made your prioritization decision.
How did we make the move? Right. So, so Tiffany, can I get you to put the API gateway overview slide back up here just for reference? Yeah, thank you. And so, when we look at our different management systems, we all told, we have roughly 4,000 plus endpoints. All right. So let's talk about an API. What is an API? An API it might serve a business function, or it's basically a collection of endpoints. All right. So if I have an order API, I might have a create order endpoint, a delete order, an update order, all these different types of endpoints that perform different functions within that API. Okay. So we have roughly let's say 1,000 different APIs, and then 4,000 different endpoints, with all these gateway platforms. Okay, so that's our landscape, our API landscape, and it's also our API attack surface. From a security perspective, that's how broad, we have things exposed to the public internet. And so when we look at securing things, we want to put Salt Security on everything right now. That's kind of that's what we set out to do, but it doesn't happen that way. And how did we kind of roll through the rollout? So, we start in a POC sense or a dev sense in each of these so that we can try out the integration, understand how it works, and then understand how to apply it to other endpoints or other environments. Okay. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, developing APIs and doing anything, applying security is different in each different platform. And so the rollout of Salt has been just a little bit different in each platform. For AWS, there's a means to do it. You can be as granular as applying it per endpoint, or you can open it up and apply it to any endpoint in an account. Okay, our preferred method would be any endpoint in an account for AWS, just because that way we deploy once and we're monitoring everything in that account. Okay. Some teams have said, we don't want to do that. We don't want to have that level of exposure. We don't want to have that level of visibility. So I'm going to isolate, I'm going to create, all the components necessary to protect this particular project. And that's it. And then as we roll out further, we'll create different components to protect these other projects. Okay. So, from a security perspective, yeah, we want to put it out everywhere right now so that we have overall visibility, but it's really dependent on, how the teams want to implement security in their environment. Okay. We advocate for everything, but we also understand that, okay, you don't want to expose, or add more latency or add more, complexity than you have to. And so, it's been, as quickly as we can in AWS. With Mastery itself, it's really it's integrating one endpoint at a time. So the rollout has been very, very slow here. We've tried to automate as best we can. Salt has provided us some automation scripts to do this. But what's happened here is that there are, I would say, platform limitations that keep us from doing a broad spectrum rollout. We've tried to roll out to 100 different APIs, and we've encountered problems with the platform, the Mastery platform itself, which has caused us to roll things back. It's had user impact. We've had to roll things back. Okay. Gotcha. With WSO2, again, you can apply it, be as granular as one endpoint, or you can do it environment at a time. And thankfully, we've been able to to do our testing, to do our performance testing with WSO2, and they are comfortable with doing it environment at a time, which has been awesome. And then, as I mentioned, Apogee, we were able to get ahead of their rollouts, and we were able to integrate with their CI/CD pipeline. So Salt Security is just going to be rolled out as part of their rollout plans.
Gotcha. Okay, that's great. Well, and I would say we see the AWS side, the Apogee side, probably most commonly. And so I think those experiences, which have been a little smoother, fortunately, they're a little more dominant maybe in the industry. And so we see some of that. Okay, you've got another question in. First, you're being thanked for answering the question so well and completely. So thank you for that. And then Venkat's second question has to do with, can you talk a little bit about the tools? And this may or may not be your bailiwick, but can you talk about the tools you're using for code and vulnerability scanning? Do you always do static, dynamic, and fuzzing?
A very good question. And again, that kind of goes back to my expert on the vulnerability team. But as far as code scanning, we do have a team that specializes in that. Static, dynamic, those various types of code scanning. And some of the tools that we use are, I know that we use SonarQube for static scanning. We use Invicti for another set of scanning. We use I don't remember the name of it, but it's called Dependabot. It's our third-party library scanner in GitHub. And so, yeah, those are some of the tools that we use.
Super helpful.
I would say, I mean, I think that Michelle, you can speak to this, but the number of vendors in the security world is staggering. It's just huge. And so, as long as there's some tool that's doing that for you, you're ahead of the game.
Yeah.
And there are other vendors that are going to do it a little bit differently, but as long as
Yeah.
there's something out there that you're doing.
No, that's really fair. And actually we're looking a lot at this right now because we think that those kinds of vendors will increasingly do more pre-prod work with APIs specifically. It hasn't been there so much to date. And so we built some pre-prod stuff, but that's a whole nother business. And frankly, again, because of the limitations, right? You can only get so far with pre-prod scanning when it comes to APIs because they are a business logic attack. And business logic gaps are very hard to detect in any kind of code scanning or analysis. Hard might be generous. They might be impossible to detect. And so even as a vendor, we're looking for the Invictis of the world, et cetera, to partner with as they get more competent at what, regardless of limitations, you want to do something in pre-prod. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not everything. It's not full protection. It would never be your whole answer, but you want to do something. And so we're having the same investigations. And Venkat, I'm happy to follow up with you on what we're learning in terms of the leaders in this area who are paying attention specifically to doing a good job on pre-prod for APIs. Hmm. So we can. Yeah,
and I would say that's a fairly new realm too, Michelle, is we've been looking at API linting solutions and we've looked at a couple different ones. And they have proven to be helpful, but yeah. they're new, and there really aren't that many of them.
Yeah, same. Yeah. And we had thought for a while, maybe we should build an API linting tool, and then we're like, there's whole businesses that do this. Like we have to stay focused, right? Salt is very focused on threat protection and runtime. This is our special sauce. This is what we're good at. That and like really effective discovery. This is just where we want to continue to put our energy. And I think there's a whole raft of folks who can do the linting and the code scanning and the vuln testing and all that.
Right. Yep.
Right. Yes. And Venkat, happy to follow up with you on that front. We will do that. So quick question. We're getting on to a bit of our time here. So maybe a quick snapshot of like, what were some of your easy wins? And then where did you hit some bumps? Like what's been hard? No journey is easy. And so, we just love a quick snapshot, what's worked well, maybe that others could look to replicate from the win side, and what missteps could people avoid?
Sure. So what has worked well? I mean, what are some of the things that we noticed right away? So because we operate in lots of different management platforms, and as I mentioned, we have 4,000 different endpoints out there, right? And you cannot protect what you can't see, what you don't know about, and even worse are the zombie endpoints, which are they used to be in play, and now they're not in play anymore, but they're still there, they're still exposed, they're still available for attack kind of thing. And so, we didn't have a system of record of our inventory. We didn't know what was out there. We have teams that are developing new APIs and endpoints all the time. And, the security team can't keep track of that. We don't know. Nobody knows what's out there. And so, Salt was able to provide us right away with the discovery dashboard. It was able to show, hey, in AWS, we have these endpoints that we've identified, and in Masher, we have these endpoints, et cetera. And so as we've rolled it out, our discovered database has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. It not only is it just identifying what the API is, where it lives, which gateway platform it lives on, but it shows us what endpoints it has. It shows us, is there sensitive data being exposed? Are there sensitive fields in there? And then, as part of the runtime protection, as soon as it's discovered, Salt is starting to watch the behavior. And so, we've been able to, one, identify APIs and endpoints, We've been able to see, what vulnerabilities are out there. We've been able to, I mean, Salt has come back to the table and said, hey, we're looking at this endpoint. This looks really, it's either pulling back too much data, or it's really vulnerable to these different types of attacks. And so it offers, ways on how to fix those. Just the feedback that we've received, from Salt has been just wonderful. And I will say, Michelle, you mentioned this earlier about the partnership, and I can't say enough about the partnership and how much we appreciate the partnership between Amway and Salt. I mean, when we were first rolling out AWS, our Salt Security and AWS, we had a use case that was kind of special. We had one account, and we wanted to deploy multiple traffic collectors to send that information over to Salt. And we encountered an issue early on in doing that, and so I got a hold of my engineer friend and explained what was happening. And in 24 hours, he had turned around a fix for me for that problem. I was able to explain it. He turned it around in 24 hours. I deployed it, and we've been good since then. So the partnership, the innovation has just been awesome. I mean, how the Salt Security listens to the customer. They take our feedback. They've offered the enhancements where appropriate to meet all customer needs. It's just like the partnership has been great. I really appreciated that. And then what are some of the gotchas? What are some of the gotchas? I would say the biggest gotcha for us is I spoke about how we've been able to get in front of Apogee. We've been able to integrate the Salt Security rollout with their CI/CD pipeline. So that has gone very, very smoothly. With some of these other ones, I mean, these were our WSO2 and Mastery for us. We're already live. They're already in production. They're already being monitored in production, etc. And so to go to these teams and try to sell something to them, hey, we have this cool API security solution which does A, B, C, and D, and we want to put it in your environment. Immediately okay, that's one more thing to do.
Don't break anything.
Don't break anything. If you break it, you have to fix it, etc.
Yeah.
And so, my advice is to get ahead of these platforms and to get this tested while it's still a dev before it's released, to avoid pushback from some of the big players. And once it's already rolled out and rolling down the runway, it's very difficult to stop and make changes. So
yeah.
that's I'd say the biggest gotcha.
And Salt works really hard to be really frictionless, to be as non-intrusive as possible in terms of deploying out of band and things like that. But it's always dicey. And let's be honest, security doesn't have a great track record of not getting in the way. Not security teams, but like security products, they can get in the way. So we've worked very hard to orchestrate something and architect something that doesn't get in the way. But I hear you, it's definitely easier to do it from the get-go.
Do it, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So no, that's a great one. Most folks do have running assets, of course, and that's our typical environment. We're coming in with the live protection in an environment where stuff's already running. That's just the reality. I'm scanning our questions. We've had some really great questions. Looks like we have answered them to date. Nate, any other closing thoughts or anything you wanted to comment on that we didn't touch on so far?
No, it's just, this has been a fun journey for us. Like I said, I started, in my previous role on the integration team, I was responsible for rolling out the gateway. And then now with the security hat, I'm responsible for securing the same gateways. So it's been a fun journey, and it's nice that there are so many articles and resources on the web, on different YouTube channels to kind of help along the journey. But yeah, read the best practices. The OWASP API top 10 is very helpful. It kind of gives you a high level, one of the biggest threats out there. There was one published in 2019, and then there's a new one being published this year. So yeah, just
And I'll add some SALT resources to the list. We have some good
yes.
stuff around what are the changes coming in the 2023 list for the OWASP API top 10, and some best practices stuff, some evaluation stuff. It's a whole new market for everybody. Everybody's in the boat that you've been in, Nate. It's
Yep.
new for everyone. And, we work hard to put out, neutral educational content. And I would also give a plug to the SALT Labs team. They're finding vulnerabilities on a regular basis and then publishing really detailed, how did we hack this and what could have been done at the various steps to avoid those gaps. So
Yep.
we just found a huge one with OAuth, for example.
Okay.
And the labs team has done a good write up on that, and another one's coming on
I
another
will
framework.
confess, when I look on my in my Salt Security API security folder, I have lots of different articles that Salt Security has published. They're very helpful. I mean, between the blogs and the articles and the API security for dummies, they're great.
There you go. Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Nate. I want to thank our audience. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much for your questions. You guys make it a lot more fun for both of us. Nate, you've been very forthcoming, very
Awesome.
honest and transparent about what's gone well and what hasn't.
Good.
So, check out some of the resources in that resources tile. Some of the titles that Nate just mentioned are in there. And of course, if you have an API security project on the books for 2023, we'd be delighted to show you the platform in action. This recording will be available shortly. We'll get it out to you. You can share it with colleagues. And thank you for spending part of your busy day. Nate, thank you to you. This was a very fun conversation. And again, to our audience, you're very busy people, and we're so grateful that you spent a little time today with SALT. So thanks,
My
everybody.
pleasure.
Hope you have hope you have a great day. And Nate, thanks for being a great partner on this.
You bet. This was fun. Thank you.